So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlene Stanberry, and I welcome you to today's webinar entitled How and Why of DE&I Implementing an Inclusion Plan in Law Schools. I'm so ecstatic this year to be serving as an ABA YLD scholar. And now I would like to introduce our ABA YLD Diversity and Inclusion Director, Mr. Daryl Wilson.
Thank you so much, Charlene, for that introduction. I just want to take a few moments to thank everyone for attending today's panel. I'm very happy and appreciative of the panelists that are here today. Charlene will give them a better introduction than I ever could, so I won't do that to them. But I'm definitely appreciative of them being here to discuss this important topic about inclusion plans in law schools. It's been a part of a 4-part series that I developed on the how and why of DE&I, focusing on inclusion plans in corporations, law firms, law schools, and then we'll round out with our last one in June, on June the 1st, which talks about inclusion plans in bar associations. So without further ado, I just want to thank everybody, also thank our sponsors for the YLD, and then turn it over now back to Charlene for the introductions in this wonderful program.
Thank you, Daryl. So we have some great panelists here today with us. So I'm actually going to give each one some opportunity and some time to introduce themselves. So first, I would like to start with Dean Quo.
So my name is Susan Quo, and I teach and currently serve as the Academic Affairs Dean at South Carolina Law. But I began my DEI and administrative journey in law as my school's inaugural Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion. And I applied for the position because I wanted to take on the challenge of developing something new and to pursue issues I've long been invested in through my scholarship, teaching, and community service. And I served in this role for about 4.5 years and loved every moment of it. As the DEI Dean, I was responsible for engaging with students, staff, and faculty to foster an inclusive community at my school. I work to enhance recruitment, retention, and success of faculty and staff, especially faculty and staff who are women and members of underrepresented or minoritized groups. I also worked with the University Chief Diversity Officer and my fellow Associate Deans for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the other colleges within the U of SC to support university DEI efforts. But I'm delighted to be here. I want to thank Daryl for inviting me to join in, and Charlene, I really thank you so much for moderating our panel, and also to my fellow panelists, Kent and Greg. I'm excited to hear and to learn from you.
Awesome. So I'm going to give it to Attorney Wallace.
Great. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be able to participate in this program today. I'm currently a consultant on higher education and diversity, equity, and inclusion. That follows many years of legal education, practicing law, and I'm Vice President Emeritus of the Law School Admission Council. Diversity, equity, inclusion is my goal and my focus, and I'm happy to be able to join this great panel today and talk to you about how diversity, equity, and inclusion is important for our member law schools.
Wonderful. And Dean Roseborough.
Yeah, so first I want to say, again, thank you so much to Daryl and the ABA for hosting this wonderful panel. And again, I'm really, really honored that you all thought of me to actually be one of your panelists for this amazing conversation. So again, my name is Dean Greg Roseborough II, and I currently serve as the Assistant Dean for Admissions, Financial Aid, Diversity, and Inclusion here at The Ohio State University Moritz College of Law. And for me, in terms of my DEI journey, it's pretty much been my entire life. I've kind of been dedicated to this work. I've been here at the law school for about 5 years. What piqued my interest in the job at Ohio State, I'm new to the chair of the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid, but I actually came here as the Assistant Director for Admissions and Diversity and Inclusion. And that was something that I've always been very passionate about in terms of, just creating more opportunities for folks from underrepresented communities, being someone from an underrepresented community and seeing, just the impact that it has when you see folks that look like you in these spaces. And so it's been a passion project for me. And I knew once I finished law school that I was never going to practice for a long time. It was always going to be something different with the JD. And I found a great way that I can kind of give back is to help, try to continue to diversify the legal community in my role in admissions. And so this is work that I'm very passionate about, and I'm really, really happy to be a part of this esteemed group, and I'm excited.
Awesome, thank you. So we're going to jump right into it. And, the first question I had for this esteemed panel is, why is it important for law professors and administrators to add DEI in the subject matter that they teach at the law schools? And I see you, Attorney Lawless. I'm looking at
Okay.
You want to start?
I'll be happy to start. It's very important because the legal profession, if you all know, is the least diverse of many professions in the United States. So diversity, equity, inclusion is extremely important for the success of our goals of trying to have a more diverse profession. But diversity, equity, inclusion is important in every aspect of legal education. And that's what I'm focusing on. It's got to be, and not only in admissions and recruitment, but also in academic support and bar passage and classes that students take, in competition for law reviews and for moot court. So everything the law school does, including teaching, is a reflection of a good diversity, equity, and inclusion program. And that's why I think we must focus on it in education in general and in legal education in specific.
I would agree. To that point, briefly, or at least what I would add to that, I mean, it is an important piece because when we think about, legal education, you look at textbooks, a lot of times these textbooks, and I'm sure it's changed a lot now, or maybe it hasn't, but when you see legal textbooks in classes like criminal law or property, a lot of times they maybe not have information there about redlining and just what kind of things, redlining has done or what kind of role it has played. And so it's, I think it's an important piece, maybe in a property class where you don't have to spend the entire class or even, an entire, series of days, but just making mention to it to like maybe start to have those light bulbs go off. I think, when we see textbooks, it's really, really formulaic and small in terms of here's a small subsection of the facts, the rule, all. And so just kind of making sure that we say to those things and making sure that our faculty are open to just at least mentioning those things and allowing students to kind of have conversations around these things in the classes, because it will affect them out in their practice.
I agree wholeheartedly with both Kent and Greg. And Kent, with respect to your comments about DEI in the full law school, not just the curriculum itself, but the full law school, I think it's important to keep in mind that the demographic characteristics of college students is already in flux. And I think back to a 2019 article in the Chronicle of Higher Education that showed that I think nationwide, some 37% of students are 25 years or older, over 40% are students of color, over 60%, I believe, work, and 40% of that group work full time. 24% have children or other dependents. We need to build programs, right, that will welcome as many well-qualified students as possible. So, and unless we take into account the demographic characteristics of the students who are coming in, we won't be prepared to serve them in the best way possible once they come to law school. And then building on Greg's point in the classroom, when we have diverse students, right, a diversity within our students in the classroom, unless we can connect the material to them, they will struggle, right, to see it as available to them. They will see our conversations about the law as stories about other people, people unlike themselves, and they will feel disconnected to the material. So I think it's important for us to think of obvious ways of talking about the diverse perspectives in law itself. And this, now I'm segueing into, I'm thinking about Kimberly Crenshaw and how impactful some of her work was for me, especially when I first began teaching. And, she wrote about perspectivelessness, right? This view of perspectivelessness, that law can be taught in a way that's neutral and unbiased without directly addressing conflicts of individual values, experiences, and worldviews, because laws are objective, neutral, right? They're colorblind. And we know that's not true simply because laws are made by humans, right? And humans all bear perspectives. So keeping this in mind and addressing that reality in the classroom will make law more real, right, for the students who we're teaching, as opposed to theoretical and not linked to the way that laws impact them or the ways laws will impact their clients.
Absolutely. Someone in the chat just said it's so true, the point on talking about other people's stories and why that's so important. So now I want to kind of get into an audit. So Dean Coy, I'm looking at you. Do you feel that it's important to run a DEI audit within law schools?
I do. As a board member on a diversity board at a law school that completed an audit, and having participated in one at my law school, I think there's real value in identifying areas of concern for students, staff, faculty, and alums. A diversity audit is an opportunity to discover where your institution is with respect to its DEI health, right? It also provides reference points from which you can evaluate your progress toward your diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And I'll add on here, because I know this is something we spoke about earlier in our preparation for our panel. Although it may require more resources, I do strongly encourage the use of an outside experienced facilitator so that the exercise is optimally constructive, and also to avoid unnecessary acrimony or perhaps even finger pointing. I also, from my experience, have learned that some constituencies may be more willing to speak candidly with an outside party.
Absolutely. Anyone else wants to add on to that?
Well, I think audits are extremely important for a whole lot of reasons, in addition to the ones we've just discussed. The major concerns I have is a school has to develop their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs tailored to that school's specific needs. So they need to find out what is going on with their students, what challenges they are having in the classroom. Are the faculty members committed to diversity, equity, inclusion in developing their courses? Are the students participating in all the many law school events? There are a lot of reasons for audits, and then the audits will help you determine whether you've made any progress on areas of inclusion, and to help you identify new programs that'll be effective for helping students. So it's part of the entire, I call it the diversity, equity, and inclusion tent, and you've got to make sure every inch of it has been evaluated every year for the purposes of benefiting the students.
I agree.
I do have an article that two of my colleagues, Belinda Dantley and Lisa Taylor, wrote, and they go through great detail about how audits are conducted and the key factors in creating an audit. And one of the biggest things they've done, and my co-panelists have already mentioned some of that, is determining what kind of diversity, equity, inclusion organization your law school will benefit from. Will they be a faculty member like Susan, administrator like Gregory, or a combination of factors? And then who will the committee be that evaluates the audit? So I like Susan's suggestion that the auditor is done by an outside objective person, so that everybody can have good data to proceed on program development.
Final thing that I would add to all those amazing things that my panelists just said is that if you do get the opportunity to go through this process of having that audit, then the outcome of that is like you will get, maybe some guideposts or some goals, because a lot of people say, we don't know what we need to do. So that, that audit is going to give you some, okay, so here are some, some goals that we can, some objectives and some, some goals that we can strive and achieve for. So that's the one thing that I at least wanted to add to that, it will kind of also kind of round out some ideas on, okay, what things should we be doing? You'll have some definitive things that you can work on there.
Heads up though, having experienced an audit firsthand at my own school, it can be very humbling, eye-opening, and educational, but very humbling when you realize that there are so many holes that need to be filled and things that you have as an institution overlooked, that you don't want to overlook, for the health of your community.
Absolutely, and just want our audience to know that the links that Attorney Lawless mentioned will be available to you, and will be on our website. So Dean Roseborough, I'm gonna point it to you. I know you've done a lot of great work in admissions. So can you kind of talk to us about what some best practices are within DEI in the admissions process?
Of course. And I'm definitely going to encourage my panelists to also chime in here as well, because what I say, at least when I look at admissions, it takes a village. So of course, not only the admissions office, but alums, faculty, staff. And so for you all on this call, from those that are faculty members, current students, prospective students, and alums, it takes all of you all. But I do, and I could talk about this for hours, but I'm going to be very, very brief in terms of here are some things that you all can kind of work on. And at first, I'll start out before they even students get to the point of applying. The first thing that schools can do, if you haven't done this already, but pipeline programs. Those are really, really, really a great resource to build diverse classes. And there are a number of ways that you can go about in terms of pipeline programs. Here at Ohio State, we have one called the Law and Leadership Institute, where we partner with high school students, and they'll spend 6 weeks here in the summer with us from freshman year all the way up through senior year. We have a number of our students who will teach in that program, and the outcomes or the successes that we've seen from that. We've had a number of scholars from the program actually return and actually join us for law school, but then they've also attended other law schools. And so pipeline programs are a key initiative. If you can get to students, and I always say, anytime a student is thinking of law school, that's great, but that middle school and that high school arena are great times, because that's when a lot of times students are thinking about that. And so one great way are pipeline programs. Next, I would say mentorship. And that goes to not only you all on the faculty, current students, but mentoring not only those who maybe come from similar areas that you are from, but reach across the aisle for maybe someone who may not look like you, maybe come from another walk of life. And so the mentorship piece of just connecting, that's another important piece of that puzzle before we even get to the point of the application process. To the recruiting point, and then I'll kind of switch to the actual application itself. But there are a host of things that you all can do at your respective law schools. One, attend. There are so many events that you all can attend in terms of minority serving bar programs. There's actually one going on today. I think the New York City Bar Association is having their event. So that's an event that's happening, but they're having a law fair that folks can attend. And it doesn't have to be, just the admissions office. I've been at a host of events where there have been faculty who've attended these law fairs, or, they've had students at these law fairs. And so, from, diversity events, there are a host of those from, like I said, the New York City Bar Association. They've had one. LSAC, the Law School Admissions Council, they host a ton of events as well. And so getting engaged with them is very, very important as well. And so those are a number of things that you all can do. Quickly, moving to the application itself, the questions on the actual application that you ask. These are a great way to capture information. Now, of course, we'll see what happens with the Supreme Court and the cases that are coming down the pike there. But asking questions about students' socioeconomic status, where are they from? Have they served in the military? You want to use these questions like this to be able to capture this information. Are they first generation? You want to use you've got the ability to ask these questions to be able to capture that information information. And then also from an accessibility standpoint, making sure that your application is accessible. Maybe someone, maybe might be having vision impaired. So you want to make sure that that you're capturing those students as well. So there's a host of things that you all can do on the application side. And I'm going to shamelessly continue to plug LSAC because they are a great resource on that front to kind of help with a lot of these things. But then also, I would encourage you all to reach out to folks on the admission staff. We always love when we have students who want to volunteer, especially faculty who want to volunteer, alums, because again, prospective students see themselves in you all, and so you all are great resources on that front. And so with that, I'll kind of slow it back. But those are some of the best practices, and there are hosts and more that I could obviously talk about as well. But I just wanted to give a nice general range of some ideas and things that folks can do now.
In addition to the ones you just mentioned, there are great programs sponsored by the American Bar Association. And we, having served on the ABA Diversity Pipeline Committee, I know there's a tremendous amount of information on our website for those of you who are interested in pipeline. The pipeline to the profession is extremely important, and developing that pipeline is extremely important as well. So I encourage you to consider other ways to attract people into the profession, from community colleges to four-year colleges and other directions as well.
Especially with the enrollment cliff that we're sliding right off of, and and I don't see the end of it in the foreseeable future. It's important for us to think more creatively how to reach all of those who will better our profession. I was also thinking about how South Carolina has kind of, as a state, has kind of come together in the past year to work together, because so many different groups have been working on different pipeline programs over the years that we've realized that we could coordinate our efforts, right, for better success overall for the state and the region. So that's one thing that I recommend that schools look into doing, is partnering with other schools in the region, partnering with their local bars, right, to host and to think collectively about how best to attract candidates to the school.
I'm all about pipeline programs. I'm the beneficiary of being a participant and grad from CLEO's 6-week summer institute at Florida International University. So shout out to Dean Michelle Mason, who has been tremendous with making sure we have that pipeline down in South Florida. There was a question in chat. I didn't know if you want to elaborate a little bit. Someone was saying, as a current attorney, what can attorneys do to help law schools when it comes to their DEI programs?
Well, real quickly, I have one suggestion, is to make sure you always are active in the school of your alumni organization, because your role as an alumni, as a mentor and as an alumni supporter, and if you can, a financial supporter of pipeline programs and scholarship programs developed to enhance diversity, equity, inclusion, are extremely important.
I'll add that we have had alums actively involved in our diversity audit, as well as our strategic planning process, and we've incorporated a lot of the results of our audit into our plans, right, into our next steps within our strategic plans. We've also hosted events that are sponsored by attorneys for, diversity, equity, inclusion events, and attorneys have come in to speak about their careers to groups of students, oftentimes partnering with our diversity and inclusion student task force or various groups at the law school to talk about a particular area of law or their own personal experience in law school or their own personal experience after law school. I mean, it's a great way to meet students and to show, and it's just to show students that there's a lot of outreach, right? That you care about their progress through school, and that you will be there to mentor them as they go through and when they graduate.
Awesome. So Dean Cole, I'm going to pose this question to you first, and then Attorney Lawless and Dean Roseborough, if you want to kind of chip in. So, we're talking about DEI program implementation. What is the role of allies in that program? Like what can allies do in regards to the implementation of DEI programming at law schools?
So thank you for this question. At first, when I was thinking about allyship, I kept thinking, but DEI is about everyone. But then I thought, no, it's also important for avoiding the polarizing consequences, right, of talking about DEI and related issues. So diversity, equity, and inclusion can be mischaracterized by some as special pleading on behalf of certain groups, or sometimes as an effort to divert resources or power or influence from others. So hearing from allies who, because of their social identities, right, maybe don't stand to advance their own personal positions, but hearing from allies who make clear that DEI is a shared mission can help diffuse any tension and again, make these efforts non-polarizing. And I can give you an example of how allyship can work. I'm trying to think farther back so all participants are non-identifiable. And so one of my colleagues, a white man, years and years ago, was assigned to one of our dean search committees a number of years ago. We've had so many, so virtually unidentifiable. And although he was still tenured at the time, I remember that he felt empowered to speak up and stated strongly his view that candidates for the deanship at my school who are members of and who were currently members of all white country clubs, right, should be considered non-starters for the deanship. And these were candidates who had made it pretty far along in the process. And finally to have someone speak up and say, no, right, made a big difference, because there are others on the committee, including prominent alums and more senior faculty from underrepresented or minoritized groups who did not feel so empowered. So as an ally, my colleague was able to voice concerns that may have otherwise gone unsaid or perhaps underemphasized. So I think allyship is very important, and that's just an example of how it can work.
One of the other advantages of allyship, I learned from my teaching critical race theory, presuming that all students who are potential allies are not aware of their role. Many of them are, and they're eager, excited to help. And so I support allyship for that reason. In addition to which, everybody's got to have a role to make the diversity tent effective. And the allies will have their role, and the other students will have their roles as well. And so I am a strong supporter of allies and helping students understand what an allyship role is. So while we're talking about the many aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion, allyship should be one of the major things that we focus on in training students who are interested and those students who want to help. So I do agree with you very much. So thank you very much for introducing that.
One thing that I would add to, again, my amazing panelists, I would just say, for the students and the attorneys and the faculty, just showing up in support, just attending events and things that are happening. That's just a great way just to say, hey, I'm just here to support, in whatever way that might look like, but just like showing up to events, like, and understanding to the big tent point, it does take all of us. So just getting involved and saying, hey, I'm happy to be a part and support. And so that's a great way to do that, just showing up.
Now, I'll add that we can all be allies because we all have privileges, right, that assert themselves in different ways, shapes, and forms. So, and it's that kind of allyship that will strengthen your relationships with others in your community and help foster, foster inclusion, but also help us achieve our goals.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Showing up is key. So I'm gonna pose this question to you, Dean Roseborough, and for everyone, for all of the panel. But at your law school, do you have DEI committees, task force, diversity officer, what setup do you have, and are there particular roles that they play within that setup?
Yes, yes, that is a great question. So while we actually do have someone who actually is in the similar position as Dean Quos, we have our Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion, who is a tenured faculty member. We just hired, super excited, they start on Monday, but a number two to that position, an inclusive excellence person. We're super, super excited about them joining our staff. We are in the process of hiring another person. I can't get it. It's the ink's not dry on that yet, but we have another fellowship kind of program, or a fellow recent grad who will be joining us on that side, kind of, partnering with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And so just from the traditional office standpoint, I guess that's kind of how it breaks down. You have our associate dean, then we have two people that serve under her. But beyond that, we have what we like to call our DEI, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Liaisons. So within the entire college, we have people in different units throughout the college who serve as the liaison for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. And so out of the admissions office, I serve as the liaison. Our Dean for Career Development is the liaison for our Career Development Office. Our head of communications, she serves as the liaison for our communications team, our marketing team. We then also have from our advancement team, someone from the advancement office who serves as one of those liaison partners, and then an HR partner as well. So and our internal HR team. And so, each person who kind of serves that has that liaison hat, they kind of also we'll kind of just talk about DEI from their respective job or their position within the college. And so just all the onus does not fall on the associate dean for diversity and inclusion, or just that office, and kind of understanding that has to permeate throughout the entire college, right? And so by creating this, not only having the office structure, but having those liaisons who also kind of report to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, it helps to kind of, have, DEI kind of have tentacles that take over the entire law school, because that's what we want it to look like. It takes everyone in the law school. Beyond that, we also actually do have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee as well, that is made up of faculty members, staff members. And then we also have student reps as well. One of the things that they worked on, we worked on a couple of years ago was the strategic plan on what do we want our office to look like, and what were some things that we wanted to see. And so the office has done things like that. We've had listening sessions with a host of our affinity organizations, and some of our religious serving student organizations. Just recently, that committee, they had a listening session with some of our more conservative organizations, like, hey, DEI includes everybody. What things, what issues are you seeing? What things would you like for us to discuss as well? And so I think with kind of that structure, we've seen a number of successes. Of course, I always want more, but that's kind of what our layout looks like. You got the actual office structure itself, the defined office structure, but then you have liaisons throughout every department at the law school that also kind of have a say so. And then also our dean has required, an implicit bias or inclusive excellence trainings that the faculty and senior administration and staff have to go through as well. And so I think that top-down approach has been very beneficial for us, but I know every law school, may be able to have that, but that's just one model of a series of models that are out there in terms of what that structure might look like in terms of the office at your law school.
We at South Carolina, I wish we were as coordinated. We have various levers working, at various times, but we started with the DEI dean position, which is now inhabited by my amazing colleague, Jan Baker. But while I was in the DEI role, I was fortunate to be able to create a student diversity and inclusion task force, which I had mentioned earlier. And as Greg was saying, it's important to have diversity, right, within your group. So this is a very diverse task force made up of a representative from each of the student affinity groups based on identity, from American Constitution Society to Federalist Society to Christian Legal Society to Jewish Law Students Association to BALSA, LALSA, NALSA, all the various ALSAs, our Veterans in Law group, our Women in Law group, our Law Students of Color Collective, just any group based on identity is invited to join and to send a representative. And we also included the Student Bar Association. So there was a representative from that group as well. So these are kind of our liaisons with the various student groups. In the past year and a half, we created a faculty and staff diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, and students also serve on this committee. They're sent over by Student Bar Association, so they apply, express an interest, and then they serve. So we do have various constituent groups, and I look forward to learning more from Greg about how to coordinate some of the efforts. But we're finding a lot of coalescing around our diversity audit and our strategic planning implementation efforts.
Attorney Lawless, do you have any kind of suggestions for us in regards to like the best structure or best practices on that?
Well, I think my colleagues have mentioned great structures. I think every school should have their own structure based on their own qualifications. That's one of the things that the study that I've included in our materials has. In addition, they've looked at the various different schools and how to do it. I also encourage schools to have a university-wide relationship. So after their law school is part of other organizations, and there's a leader of diversity on your campus, make sure that the law school also is very active in those programs as well. The final thing I think is a diversity program needs to talk about the key barriers of diversity and train people, students how to overcome it, train faculty members how to avoid it, and train staff members how to avoid it. So I think a curriculum, a diversity curriculum consistent with all those programs is very helpful for law schools to achieve their diversity tent building.
Ken, I like that you mentioned you urged us to also be involved at the university level. And we do have at South Carolina a Council of Academic Diversity Officers. So it's made up of the DEI dean for each of the colleges. But that has been, when I served in the position, it was an immense source of support, as well as ideas and resources, because we shared speakers. We learned a lot about each other's unit. And in particular, we learned that we have a lot of similarities, right, that run through our students, our staff, and our faculty, their concerns, their hopes, their aspirations. So it was good. It was a good way to unify us in our DEI goals. I note here that we have a comment from one of our participants about a DEI committee that's only for faculty. And we originally had put together our DEI committee for faculty. And in looking at it, we thought, well, it's not really inclusive if we don't include other constituents at the law school. So this is when we reached out to staff and also the Student Bar Association to include students within its workings as well. So, I would suggest that you urge your committee to think more broadly about membership.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And just a tip, if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat or drop it in our Q&A. So I have one last question on my end, and then we're going to go to the audience questions, which are excellent. So the last question that I had is, how should one incorporate inclusive practices for students who are persons with disabilities?
Well, I think one of the key things that you need to be concerned about is intersectionality. And so all of our affinity groups are usually related to other affinity groups as well. So students who have disabilities and students who are first generation, all these students have special needs that we ought to be concerned about, that ought to be part of the diversity program. Now, almost every accreditation requirement of the ABA requires you to make sure that you have accommodations for students with disabilities. that's one factor. I think mental health of students is another factor that is part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion program, because there are so many challenges today that are facing our students that we need to always make sure about their mental health. So disabilities, mental health, and other kinds of affinity groups are part of the intersectionality that creates the big diversity tent.
What I would add to that, I just encourage schools and folks who have, the relationships with schools to take, as much as you possibly can, a proactive approach instead of a reactive approach. I feel like a lot of times in this situation, schools will make the change because we might have a student incoming who might have, a disability or whatever the case may be, and we're trying to quickly scramble and catch up, right? And I know we've got a lot of things going on, but I think it's important to be constantly thinking, all right, so, how can we continue to not only make sure that we're compliant, but stay ahead as things continue to grow and change. And so taking that proactive approach, I think is really, really important and really, really will help in that regard, for sure.
And one thing I've learned to assist with proactivity is to reach out to our Student Disabilities Resource Center, as well as our various HR constituents at the university, both at the law school and beyond, because there are things beyond just laws and compliance, right, that we can do to make our spaces and our processes more welcoming, right, to all, right, and as Kent was saying, for all who fit in our DEI tent. There are not only physical disabilities, but disabilities arising from mental and emotional concerns that many of us, because of the perspectives we bear, right, don't have an inkling about, or how to accommodate or address those needs. But there are other people, fortunately for me, I'm at a large university where they have much more experience, right, in working with people with different needs than mine. And I've learned a lot from these relationships and these connections that I've made.
Wonderful. So I see a question in our Q&A that I want to ask. And so I'll read it now. It says, how do you get faculty in a PWI to buy into DEI? And I'll read the entire question just so that you can get some background. It says, how can we convince them about the value of DEI in the curriculum when this is how we have always taught mentality is prevalent and resistant to change? You can't make faculty do anything when they are untouchable in the aspect of tenure, and they continue to hire folks with the same mentality. So, to the panel, do you have any thoughts or suggestions or answers to that question?
Well, one of the things that I think we ought to make sure that faculty have access to other programs that help them add diversity, equity, inclusion topics to their courses. After teaching critical race theory, so many classes don't have any discussion of the elements that are vital to critical race theory. And so I think that anything we can offer the class, offer the faculty members to have periodic conversations about ways to increase their classes. There are a lot of ABA committees getting together now, and AALS committees getting together, encouraging faculty members to talk about topics to add to their courses as well. We can't force all faculty members to comply with that. That's not the goal. The goal, though, is to make sure that they want, most faculty members that I've had contact with want to make sure their students appreciate their work and their evaluation of their work and their classes. And that's one of the things that students will consider in evaluating faculty members. So I think that's certainly one approach.
Yeah, something that I would add that we've done at Ohio State in my previous role as the Assistant Director for Admissions, Diversity and Inclusion, we polled the faculty. So as we've said, you can't make faculty do things right. Of course, you still want them to be able to have, the freedom to teach how they like, but we just polled faculty and asked them, well, how often in your class conversations about, gender, sexual orientation, age, just all these. So we kind of polled the faculty to kind of like maybe to get them maybe to start thinking about, okay, maybe if I haven't brought it up, maybe it wouldn't hurt to maybe, have, some sort of conversation around it. So that's one way, just a simple like, as we have what we call here a teaching innovation group. And that teaching innovation group has also, they've had guest speakers come in and talk about, hey, here are ways that you can kind of maybe incorporate XYZ into your curriculum. And so they bring in outside speakers that will just come and talk about how they've done it. And that's been an interesting way as well. So I would say, just questionnaires, and then, maybe, bringing in outside faculty. Oh, sorry about that. I see I froze up.
You did, but you still did marvelously when you unfroze. You came back online. I agree with my distinguished panelists. I'm learning and writing things down as everyone is speaking. I'll just chime in and add that external speakers do make a difference. I was able to start an inclusive teaching series, but I found that more people are now interested on my faculty because of the diversity audit, right? Actually hearing from those who are impacted by what we are doing or are not doing in our classrooms, what we are doing or not doing in our, in our relationships and our ways we interact with people within the building has hurt our students, and to hear their voices was painful, I think, for all of us, because I think I can speak on behalf of colleagues broadly, but certainly my colleagues here at the law school, we do care about our students. We really care about teaching. And when you learn that what we're doing is not helping or is possibly harming our students, that, that inspires us to make some differences. So number one, hearing from those who are impacted. And number two, make it easy. And this is what Greg and Ken are talking about. Make it easy. It's something I've said to various publishers when I've sat in these meetings. What could casebook publishers be doing to make this easier for faculty? Give them things that they don't have to think, how am I going to revamp how I teach this course? Because I've taught it the same way for 20 years. I'm still using my notes, and the 20th edition of this book, every single year. What can I do to incorporate more perspectives in my classroom? Well, there are actually books, not just speakers, but books out there that say, here are 3 cases that you could use when you talk about this topic. There you go. Pick it up, drop it in. So, we can find ways to make it easy and to bring it to faculty so they can say, oh, I'll just do this for today, or I'll do this for next week.
So, Attorney Lawless, you mentioned critical race theory. One of the questions that we had was focused on CRT, and just kind of want to hear a little bit about your experience with critical race theory, with teaching it, and do you feel like some of the recent bans have affected its implementation, so to speak?
Well, one of the biggest problems that I have is that the critical race theory is that we teach in law schools was a legal analysis developed by law professors. It was not a introductory class to history. And I think back to when I was a student in grade school, we had to have a class in Black history to find out anything about Black history. So all we're trying to do now, so now we're presenting ourselves in a position where we're reversing all that back to what it was like before it was inclusive. So there's a difference between inclusive history and subject matters and critical race theory, which analyzes specific areas of the law that have racial discrimination backgrounds. And so there's a big distinction in that. And I think that that's what we need to focus on when people do it. When I taught it, I would make sure my students understood that, and I would show them common critiques of critical race theory and distinguish it from what we started when critical race theory was developed by legal scholars. And so that's my biggest point, is there's a bigger difference, and the difference needs to be constantly distinguished and not combined together. Because what is happening in grade schools in introducing famous writers is not critical race theory. It's a broad, diversified view of subject matter.
Awesome. And another question that we had submitted from the audience is, how do you change the conversation of DEI from being polarized and prevent it from being like a us versus them type conversation?
Yeah, it's tough. What I would say or encourage is, as we've been talking about a little bit on this call, understanding that, DEI, it includes all of us. And so making sure that we're welcoming to all folks and saying, hey, even if you don't, you feel like you don't fall in this category, you do as an ally. Or so just pulling everyone in to start to have a conversation, say, hey, this takes all of us to move this, and understand that this is not an othering, and that's not what we're trying to do. That's not the goal of this. The goal of this is to make our law schools more inclusive for everyone, whether you come from, a rural part of the country, maybe you're first generation, maybe, you're from, across the pond. We want to make this, our law schools welcoming to everyone. So I think, when we're, hosting events and putting on programming, just continuing to say and to signal, this is for everyone. It takes all of us, as cliche as that sounds. I think a lot of times we just really sometimes maybe forget that, but it is tough, especially in this climate.
There are ways in, especially in orientation programs, for example, where you can reach students before they have already othered, right, DEI. And one of my favorite things to do was to run exercises where everybody was working together to solve problems, and all of a sudden they realized that all their perspectives mattered, and DEI wasn't just about a particular group of people. And again, but allyship comes in because certain issues may arise for particular groups of people, at different times, and other people can step forward and say, oh, I'm part of this conversation as well. So I'm one of the people on this panel, all of us who strongly believes that everyone benefits from diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we all come from different backgrounds. We all need to be able to communicate effectively with our clients, our colleagues, right, and others to practice law and to learn about law effectively. And our understanding of how the law works is enriched by bringing in these different perspectives. I've found success with this, and also as a small little microcosm within the task force. When we created it, we built it around the premise that they couldn't do anything without full consensus of the entire group. So that immediately brought people in. Okay, if I want to get this event done, I got to get everyone else to buy into it. And this was, it was very educational, enriching for all of us to recognize what we shared, right, and how we could help each other.
When I emphasize allyship and intersectionality with my students, they realize that the distinctions that would put people in these separate categories are very rare, and that many of them share a lot of the same challenges and responsibilities. So I think that's I agree with you. I think that's a great point, to make sure that students understand the diversity tent is a big tent, and the allyship and intersectionality cover so many of those areas that it is not a us versus them category at all.
So the last question I had for this esteemed panel is, how do you make cultural changes within your institution when it comes to DEI?
So for that, it's gonna be, it's unique to each institution. But what I would say, I think it starts with, on an individual, whatever, constituent you are in the law school, be a student, be a faculty member, whoever you are, using your platform. I tell students, you all have a lot of power. I mean, you can start with student organizations. So build a student organization if there's maybe an area or a need that you are seeing that's just not been met. That's one way. From the faculty perspective, like I said, just not only speak up, but just be supportive and just kind of show up. But I think it's going to be unique to each individual school. But what I encourage folks is like, it just kind of starts with you, just trying to reach out to not only to folks who might maybe agree with you on a host of things, but maybe folks who don't agree with you on a host of things, but reaching out and starting to build those connections. I think it kind of can have that ripple effect in a pond. But again, it's going to be unique to each institution. But I just encourage folks, do what you can in your seat. So again, like I said, from that student perspective, the easiest thing you all can do is like start from a student group perspective. From alums, you all can kind of start reaching out because you also play a powerful role in this. So start reaching out, and when you're talking to advancement or to deans or whoever, just kind of mentioning things about DEI or just concerns that you might have or things you have an interest in. And so just kind of wherever you are in that journey, be a student, be out in practice, I would say it kind of just starts with you kind of on a personal level. And it's something as small as, again, just, maybe re-engaging with your institution, or, maybe starting that student organization, or asking questions about how can we make our DEI committee maybe more inclusive, just kind of just starting to start the conversation. I think that's a big step.
There are many ways to show institutions that they're the same. Recent discussion by fellow DEI officers, they all talked about the tribes that occupied the lands that their law schools were built on. So there are ways for us to bring these subject matters into a group conversation, and I think it's very helpful to the students and to all the affinity groups affected in the law school.
Culture is not something that can be imposed top down, right? It has to be built from bottom up. And one of the best things you can do as an individual, or as a group, is to build longevity, right, into your efforts. So it's not just a one and done that you leave and then there's no one there to sustain the work. But there are many ways to get that going, whether that's through an audit, right, or a survey, or a town hall, or just a student event, right? To the extent that you want it to be fully impactful, you want to provide opportunities for everyone who wants to be heard to be part of the event or part of the process, right? And then you start from there. I mean, working groups, regular meetings, create your own task force. But without everyone hands on, change doesn't happen. So even your small efforts as an individual create a ripple effect.
That's true.
So we're winding down to this great panel, but just want to kind of give you some time if there were any closing thoughts that you had for us.
Well, I would just encourage people to realize that your diversity, equity, inclusion program at your institution has to be unique. It requires your constant data collection and evaluation of the program. And as long as you commit to that, the results of it can be used to build the strong diversity, equity, inclusion tent.
I would say that a DEI director, dean, auditor, committee, what have you, no matter how talented or committed, cannot substitute for an institution's own willingness to engage and to take the necessary steps to improve its culture. DEI work is community work, and it requires intentionality and dedication from the community. But I'll also say that it's work that's immensely rewarding, and I recommend it to everyone.
And I would just say ditto to those amazing comments by my colleagues, because they hit the nail on the head, like to that point. And I just want to say thank you all for showing up for events like this, but just kind of continue to doing the work. That showing up is just so important. Just continue to show up and continue to start conversations.
Show up and start conversations. So, just want to say thank you to our esteemed panel today. Thank you for joining us. I know that I learned a lot and took a lot of notes, and I know everyone else did. And, this recording definitely will be available. And again, thank you, everyone, and hope you have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.